Okay, good afternoon to everybody. We will continue our discussion on world religions. Last week we started with question of what is religion and also some definitions of religion. So we looked at several different definitions starting from the Concise Oxford Dictionary definition and then also George Galloway's definition, and we looked at some definitions from Rudolf Otto, Sigmund Freud and Karl Marx. Rudolf Otto's definition that religion involved in something non-rational. Now the meaning of that word is non-rational means something that cannot be described by language. Now when we say rational, we mean that something can be described by language. Rationality has something to do with logicality, logicalness. So logic is connected with language. So something that cannot be described by language. Now when Rudolf Otto says that religion involves something non-rational, according to his understanding, a religion has to have something that which you cannot describe in language. Like any natural phenomenon, we can describe in language. But according to Rudolf Otto, if everything can be described in religion, then of course it is not the proper religion. In other words, what it says is a religion has to have some kind of mystery inside, something that we do not understand really. You know, that is this is basically we can say the theistic, God-centered religious concept of religion. Because God is considered to be ultimately incomprehensible, that beyond the comprehension of ordinary human being. So therefore, if somebody says that God is comprehensible, that means he can be comprehended. Actually, that God is not considered to be the proper God. Because if you can know everything about God, then whole idea is that God is not proper God. So God must have something that you cannot understand, something, some kind of mystery. Now, I also referred to you about in Taoism, their main text is Tao Te Ching. Tao Te Ching begins with the statement that Tao that can be described is not really Tao. The idea is that what can be described is what is clear, what is obvious. But then religion has to have something mystical, something that goes beyond your comprehension, that goes beyond your understanding. So the whole point is this. Now, when God or the fundamental principle in religion is incomprehensible, then we have always a sense of awe, sense of some sense of fear, some sense of distance. If everything is crystal clear, then there is no mystery. Okay. So therefore, the popular understanding of religion, the definition of religion, this Rudolf Otto's definition is very important. And also this is very important for you when you try to understand this definition and the nature of Buddhism. Because if you look at the Buddhist philosophy, you can see that the whole the basic understanding of Buddhism about the teaching of the Buddha, about the world, about Arhanthood, and everything is very different. Different in the sense, ultimately according to Buddhism, there is no mystery. There is no something that you cannot understand about the Buddha or about Nirvana or anything else. Of course, it doesn't mean that each and everybody can understand it, but what it means is, if you are a person who has practiced, attained that stage, then you can understand it, right? So there is a very interesting contrast between this kind of religion and also Buddhism. Because I'm going to also discuss with you today whether Buddhism is a religion, in what sense Buddhism can be a religion. But this particular Rudolf Otto's definition is very important when we contrast this with Buddhism. Because in Buddhism, in fact, there is no mystery. I will give you one example. When this comes in many discourses, but for example, in Samanyapala Sutta, Digha Nikaya, there is a long description about various states that anyone can attain by following the monkhood. You remember King Ajatasattu comes to see the Buddha, and he questions from the Buddha. He asks, what is the meaning of, what is the purpose of living a monastic life? That is the king asked that question. That question is very interesting because, king sees all these people, men, and also maybe they are bhikkhunis, women, men and women, wearing robes and, living in the monastery. But for king, it was a problem because these people, these men and women can be in the society and doing some work. Okay, so but whereas they are not doing any work, they are living in the monastery. So king asked this question, okay, what is the use of living this life? Then Buddha says this life has many uses, and Buddha goes on describing dhyanas, marga and phala. In the final analysis, talking about arahanthood, Buddha gives this simile, that is the important part. Buddha says that if a person with good eyesight see a water pool or pond with clear water, and then when that person goes to the clear water pool, he can see the bottom. He can see in the bottom fish swimming and pebbles, shells, all these things he can see in the bottom. Now in the same manner, Buddha says, when you attain that knowledge, arahanthood, you can see suffering, it is arising, cessation, all these things, like a person sees shells and fish and everything and the bottom of that clear water pool. What is the significance of this simile? The significance of this simile is this: when you become an arahant, you see the reality of the world like you see a clear water pool, bottom of a clear water pool. No mystery, nothing hidden, nothing that you cannot understand. If you have followed the path and if you reach that level, then you see it very clearly. So you see, there is a very important difference between Buddhism and this kind of definition of religion. But this Rudolf Otto's definition basically fits the theistic religion, God-centered religion. Because in a God-centered religion, ultimately God has to be some kind of mystery, something that goes beyond our intellect. This is the idea. So that way we saw a couple of definitions in our last week discussion. And then I gave you Sigmund Freud and Karl Marx. Those definitions are actually their interpretation of what they mean to be religion. So according to Sigmund Freud, religious belief, religion is something related to our infantile thinking and the fantasies, the things we create in our mind. According to Karl Marx, it is a social phenomenon. It is the religion that keeps people satisfied with their miserable life. Many people's lives are miserable, but religion keeps them satisfied about their miserable life. Now, according to Karl Marx, if you are not satisfied about your life, you revolt, you fight against it. But religion keeps them non-fighting, because you become religious and religion says that, okay, behave very well. This life you are miserable because of your bad behavior. So you better be good and then you will get a better life in the next birth. So expecting a better life in the next birth, people behave well. So people don't fight. Now, not only the concept of God, actually even the concept of karma can be used in that sense. Sometimes we say that, people say that, oh, it's your bad karma. You are born poor, you remain poor, you don't, improve you a lot. It's because of your bad karma. So it is you are responsible for that, so therefore you be good. Now again you see that karma teaching, which also is accepted in Buddhism, has been used to keep people satisfied. Then they don't question. So you can see that according to Karl Marx, that type of religion is really a problem for society. That's why he says it is the opium of masses. Opium means when you keep on taking opium, you are not living in this world. Your mind is addicted to it. You don't see anything. It's like drug addiction. You are kind of addicted to some kind of drug. So in the same manner, so these are some of the definitions of religion. And subsequently, I showed you when we take the word religion today, we are using this word for 4 different meanings, namely a system of belief, doctrines or teachings, a set of practices, rites and rituals, an organization with hierarchical structure of clergy, sacred text and object. Now, although we saw those definitions, today when we use the word religion in English language, maybe you have a similar word in Burmese language, in Sinhala language we use the agama, so we say Buddha agama or Christiani agama, Christianity and so on. So in any language, now in English when you use the word religion, actually you use all these 4 things. In a particular context, we may be referring to 1 or 2 or 3 or all 4. But when we use the word religion, you are talking about the system of beliefs. So beliefs we have in our mind with us, or system of belief, and doctrines, teachings, and set of practices, rites and rituals, an organization with hierarchical structure, clergy, sacred text and objects. Now, what do you think? Can we say Buddhism a religion in these senses? Can we say Buddhism religion in the definitions we saw? Yeah. Actually, in the definitions we saw, I think we cannot call Buddhism a religion in that sense. However, if you go by this, not only Buddhism, any world religion you can call a religion from the senses, right? So 2 things here. One thing is, according to the definitions we saw, it is hard to say Buddhism a religion. However, if you look at the word, how the word is being used today, I think Buddhism also has all these 4 aspects, right? Do you agree or disagree? Buddhism has all these 4 aspects. Buddhists have certain beliefs, right? As Buddhists, we have certain beliefs. Yes or not? Okay. And then doctrines, of course, we know doctrines, 4 Noble Truths, Paticamuppada, and all these things are doctrines we have. And then set of practices, rites and rituals. Yes, we have practices like observing Vasana, and then all kinds of practices we have. What we do on full moon poe days and stuff like that. And then organization with hierarchical structure. We have also a monastic organization with the hierarchical structure, top the highest person, and going down. So Buddhist society has a hierarchical organization. Now we can say that Buddhism also has all these 4 aspects. Now I would say, in this sense, we can call Buddhism a religion. So in other words, I am saying to you 2 things. It is not easy to say Buddhism is a religion. Now if you look at the belief in supernatural, superhuman controlling power, especially in a personal God, I don't think we can say Buddhism a religion in this sense, okay? And also look at George Galloway's thing. man's faith in the power beyond himself, whereby he seeks to satisfy emotional needs and gain stability and so on, which he expresses in acts of worship and service. Now, in these senses, I don't think we can call Buddhism a religion. Okay, but then also Rudolf Otto's non-rational, something that cannot be described by language. This is debatable. But basically we can see that in Buddhism there is this non-rational aspect is not really found. So therefore in this sense we can say that in these senses we cannot say Buddhism a religion. However, if you look at these 4 different characteristics, from these characteristics we can say that yes, Buddhism is a religion. So in other words, I am trying to give you 2 answers. Is Buddhism a religion? That's the question. Is Buddhism a religion? So we can say that in one sense, in the etymology, according to the definition of religion, popular definition of religion, we cannot say Buddhism a religion. Okay? Because definition has been given by looking at the theistic religion. European theistic religion. So they have looked at that and then definition has been given accordingly. Now usually people have a problem in theistic religions about Buddhism because Buddhism doesn't believe in a creator God. Now very often people think that in order for something to be a religion, there must be a God. There must be a superhuman power. So there is no such thing. So in the absence of such thing, you cannot apply these definitions to Buddhism. Okay, so we can say that Buddhism is not a religion according to them. But however, when you look at the use of the word today in language, in English language or in any language, now we are using the word in those senses. So in these senses, you can say yes, Buddhism can be called a religion. Okay, so anyhow, think about it. But there may be even other uses where we use the word religion. So definition is one, the use of the word is another. So this is the use of the word. And also I explained to you this certain aspect, sacred and profane in religion. There are some of these aspects even in Buddhism, esotericism and exotericism in religion. Now when we look at the Buddhism, look at the last paragraph. Is Buddhism a religion? Terms used in the discourses refer to the teachings of the Buddha, Sasana and the Dhamma Vinaya. Now, instead of the word, if you want to look for some term in Buddhist literature, how did the Buddha refer to his own organization? Now, Buddha referred to his own organization, the one word is Sasana. Now, this Pali word Sasana is basically used in the sense of message, teaching. Okay, what the Buddha teach. But of course, when you say what the Buddha teach, it also includes not only what the Buddha teach, but also everything that is built around what the Buddha teach. Now this very well known stanza in the Dhammapada, I referred to it in my last week discussion also. In the Dhammapada we have Sabba Papassa Akaranang Kusalassa Upasampada Sachitta Pariyodapanang Etang Buddhana Sasanang. This is Buddha's message. Etang Buddhanang Sasanang. This is the message of the Buddha. Now Sasana is basically the message. Message means the teaching, doctrine, what the Buddha said. So this is basically in that sense the word Sasana is used. And in many other places Buddha also uses the term Imasmin Dhamma Vinaya. Imasmin Dhamma Vinaya, in this Dhamma and the Vinaya. Now there of course Dhamma Vinaya has been used grammatically as a Dvanda Samasa. Dhammancha Vinayancha Dhamma Vinaya. Dhamma and the Vinaya. So it's a combination. Dhamma is the teaching. Vinaya is the practice. Precepts are to be practiced. So in a way, Dhamma Vinaya can be described as Dhamma and the practice, or theory and the practice, but the combination of theory and practice. So the significance of combination of this word is Buddha doesn't view his teaching only as a teaching. No, it's also Dhamma but Vinaya. But on the other hand, not only as practice but also Dhamma. So theory and the doctrine or explanation and the practice develop according to it. So Dhamma Vinaya is a very important, significant term because Dhamma Vinaya captures theoretical and practical both aspects. You know, Sasana has been described Pariyatti, Patipatti, Pativeda, right? Pariyatti, Patipatti, Pativeda. So Pariyatti, Pariyatti is the doctrine, study, teaching, the study in the doctrine. Patipatti is the practice based on that. And Pativeda is something psychological, mental, what you get after that. But basically, Pariyatti and Patipatti. Pariyatti is the word of the Buddha, Tripitaka, discourses, Vinaya, Sutta, Abhidhamma. So Pariyatti and Patipatti. Now Dhamma is not a mere Pariyatti, Dhamma is not a mere Patipatti. Dhamma is both Pariyatti and Patipatti. Now you see, why I am emphasizing these two is the way Buddhism looks at Buddhism itself. Now this is how Buddhism looks at itself, how Buddha looked at his own organization. Okay? Buddha never used the word like religion or something that close to it. Buddha used the term Dhamma Vinaya. He must mean Dhamma Vinaya. In this Dhamma Vinaya. So in this Dhamma Vinaya means the whole organization and the practice. Okay? So according to Buddhism, we can say, according to these two terms, now the definition earlier you saw is superhuman power, something beyond yourself. But you don't have anything like that here, okay? Dhamma Vinaya is not superhuman power. Dhamma Vinaya is not anything beyond you. Dhamma Vinaya is for people to practice. So you see this definition of religion according to Buddhism is, very different. And also the Buddha's own case, Buddha never said that he is a god or somebody. Buddha was never a god or somebody. Now God is a creator God, and also God can give the judgment about people, whether they are going to go to hell or heaven. Now did the Buddha do that? No, Buddha could not do that. Buddha cannot send anybody to hell, or Buddha cannot send anybody to heaven. Buddha cannot give anybody nirvana. But what the Buddha can do is, Buddha can guide them. Buddha can guide them. But people have to do that. So Buddha is basically, what is the Pali term? Sattha. Buddha is basically Sattha. Sattha is the teacher, guide. Have you heard this word in the Jataka stories? We have the word called Satthu Nayaka. Who is Satthu Nayaka? Satthu Nayaka. There Satthu means the caravan. Caravan of 100 carts, 100 bullock carts, so 500 bullock carts. Satthu Nayaka means the leader of the caravan. Now, although, say for example, 500 carts, caravan with 500 carts, but this person who is the leader is the one who guides them. So all the 500 carts, although there are such a big number, it depends on one person's guide. So that person is the one who guides all the 500 carts. So Satthu Nayaka. Now where the caravan is going depends on how you guide it. If you misguide it, caravan goes, can get lost in the desert. So Satthu Nayaka. I think this Sattha has something to do with this. Sattha is the guide, one who guides the people. So it is up to the people. So the role of now I will discuss this matter again when I am discussing the role of the teacher in religion in one of my later lectures. But today, just to remind you this fact. So this is basically what I discussed with you so far about the definition and the nature of religion. Then we will move on to some other information about religion. Okay, another important thing is we can study the types of religion. Types means different. Now if you take one particular thing, it can have different types, different kinds. So different types of religion or different kinds of religion. So we can analyze religion as theistic religion and non-theistic religion, theistic religion and monistic religion, or polytheism, henotheism and monotheism, axial religion and non-axial religion. So there are actually even more accounts of these things. Let me begin with the very last one, axial religion and non-axial religion. Actually this word axial and non-axial is used in the literature in religion today. What is meant by this is axial, non-axial. What is meant by this is a religion is an axial religion when it has a concept of final liberation. So axial religion is the religion which teaches about final goal, final liberation. So the concept of liberation. Now if you take Christianity, you have the concept of savior, saving. So God saves. Now when God saves, these people go to eternal heaven. So that is the end. That is the culmination of the religious path. So that is example for axial religion. Now if you take Hinduism, you have the concept of moksha, right? Moksha. Now moksha comes from much, to liberation, the release. In Pali we say mokha. Mokha is also the same thing. Sanskrit is moksha, Pali is mokha. So moksha, and then Pali we have mokha. So both means it can be release, it can mean freedom, liberation, these things. And then Judaism, Christianity and Islam, we have the concept of heaven. So axial religion is religions that teach final destination, final goal, and final goal as some kind of heaven or some kind of liberation. Non-axial religion means the religions that do not teach that type of thing. Actually by non-axial religion, this is more to historical analysis. In the history, the early religions were described as non-axial religion because early religions were very simple. When we come to discuss the origin of religion, we will see that in early societies, people had a very simple form of religion. Simple form of religion is, to believe in a god or some different gods, not really even gods, some dead people, dead relatives, some objects like huge trees, huge mountains and things like that. So the religious belief was pretty simple. It consists simple worship, nothing more than that. So in a primitive society, non-axial religions were non-axial. Religions didn't have deep philosophy or religious ideas, so they were pretty simple. Now when we talk about axial religion with this kind of goal, we call these things this word soteriology. Soteriology means study of saving, soteriology, the study of savior, or you can say study of religious goal, soteriology. Now this word basically used to refer to axial religion, soteriology. So you have a soteriology or a discussion about the Savior, saving God in axial religion. In non-axial religions you don't have a soteriology because that non-axial religion is not that developed. In other words, non-axial religion is primitive religion, what we consider to be the primitive religion. In primitive societies, in history long time ago, in primitive societies, religion was like that. Not only long time ago, even now in primitive societies, like sometimes you get in certain tribes living in Amazon and certain tribes in some remote islands in Papua New Guinea or Indonesian area or something like that, or even primitive people who are living in aborigines like Australia, like countries. So all these people, even in this country there are so many tribes, some tribes their religion is very basic. In the sense, some sort of worship, offering something and that's all. They don't talk about the purification, they don't talk about the path, nothing of these things. So without any of those sophisticated things, the pretty basic religion consisting prayers and forms of worship is what is called non-axial religion. So in time-wise, axial religion is something coming later. Initially it was non-axial religion. Okay. Now you can see when we talk about the Vedic religion, actually Vedic religion initially was non-axial religion. However, gradually Vedic religion evolved to be an axial religion. Okay. So you will see further when we discuss that aspect. So historically we can describe religion to be axial religion and also non-axial religion. So non-axial religion is basically what is called primitive religion. Okay. In primitive religion, what people usually had was, we say, animism. Animism means belief in dead people's spirits. So basically when somebody is dead, they believe that person's what they believe to be spirit is hanging around. So basically they prayed for the animism means dead people's spirits, animism. And also they had various types of beliefs associated with objects, plants, trees, natural objects and things like that. So characterized by pretty basic simple forms of worship, animism. If you read something under primitive religion, you will see quite many things, in different societies, how people, believe in animism and things like that. Still we can see in some societies. I remember in America and Canada, there are people called Red Indians. What do you call Red Indians? Actually, they were the original people in America and Canada, those areas. Now, still they have these beliefs. They have what is called totem pillars, TOTEM, totem pillars, where they take a log of a wood and they carve different faces of what they consider to be ancestors, dead people. They are the various deities and things like that, and then they pay homage to these objects. So therefore non-axial religion and axial religion is now when religion started talking about the concept of moksha, saving, or savior. This is a later, more recent development in religion. So the earliest religions we have referring to the savior God is Judaism. But you can see, when you see the story of Judaism, Judaic story is a pretty simple story. According to that story, according to, they call it Torah. Torah means what we call Old Testament today, in T-O-R-A, Torah. This is Jewish religious tradition. The book is called Torah. That means the Old Testament in the Christian literature, because Christianity has both. In Torah there is this story, the God and Abraham having agreement. Now this is something very simple story, because on the one hand the creator God coming to a human being and having an agreement. But that sounds like very simple, right? God coming and saying, okay, Abraham, you believe only in me, not in other false gods, and I will protect you. Now this is the basic, what they call covenant, agreement between Abraham and the God. Now that is how it started. But the concept that God will save these people. So Judaism is a pretty early stage of soteriology, okay. But however, when it comes to Christianity, when it comes to Islam, and then in the Brahmanic tradition, Brahmanism, when it comes to Upanishadic tradition, we can see that and Buddhism, Jainism, the concept of moksha has become a very, very complex, very powerful, very important concept. Okay, so based on the concept of moksha, emancipation, saving, savior God, axial religion is born. So this is one category. When we study world religions, we can study world religions as primitive religions which are non-axial, and also more recent religion as axial religions. Okay, and then we will go to the next one: polytheism, henotheism, and monotheism. Now this particular category has been proposed with regard to Indian religious tradition. Now if you look at Rig Veda, Indian religious literature, scholars have shown that in the Rig Veda we can see what is called polytheism. But actually even before polytheism, we can see in the Rig Veda, natural objects are being turned into divine beings, or natural objects are being considered as divine. We know this is pretty, in a way, very interesting idea. Now, when initially in a very early stage, for example, people did not know about fire. What they saw was sometime, in the hot season, trees getting touch with each other and then fire arising. But then when the fire arises, it burns whole areas, right? I mean, it is so dangerous, so ferocious. So, people started developing some kind of sense of respect toward it. But at the same time, they found that fire they can use for their own use. So on the one hand, fire is so dangerous and bad. But on the other hand, you can use fire for your own purposes. Now this is, usually we can imagine this is how people started worshipping fire. Now fire is, very interesting phenomenon, particularly for the primitive person to understand how fire comes. It's very, very interesting. So you can see that, trees, touch each other like this, due to the wind, and then suddenly fire comes. Now, an ordinary person is thinking, where did this come from? It was not there. How did it come? Because sometimes, he cannot make the connection. But then after seeing that, then he takes 2 dry woods and he makes like this, and also fire comes. But still, it's a mystery. How can you explain how fire comes? You just did this, you just touch these 2 pieces of wood, but then fire comes. And fire is so ferocious. but you can control it for your own use. So you see, they develop a sense of veneration, sense of respect, sense of awe, sense of fear about the natural things. Now today, we are not worried about these things. We take a matchbox and we just do this and we light something. But we never get thinking, oh my God, where is this coming? No, we never think. We take the lighter and fire is there. But it's not a big issue for us today. But think about 20,000, 30,000 years ago, long time ago, people did not know what it was. So, the thing you don't understand, then you try keep it very respectfully because you don't understand. You remember Rudolf Otto's definition of religion, something mystery, something fearful, something you don't understand. So far, so long as there are things we don't see, we don't understand, we always we are scared of them because we don't understand it. So this is the reason why the fire worship, how it is started. But fire worship is something very interesting. Even today, India is such a developed country. Agni, the word used is Agni. Agni is one of the biggest, one of the most important devas in the Indian tradition even today. Sometimes you must have seen in the teledramas and all that when they're getting married, what they do is they go around fire, right? Fire god. Now still they have this fire sacrifice. I know that one American scholar, Fritz Stahl, I think, he wrote 2-volume books called Fire. Sometimes you will see it, I have seen. Huge volumes. One volume is something like this big, like maybe one volume has a lot of pictures and one volume may be like 1,000 pages. Huge 2 books on fire. Indian fire practice, fire god. So name of the author is Fritz Stahl. If you look under his name, you will find it in Google. So he wrote these huge 2 books on fire. So fire is, still something very, very important for the Indian culture even today. But it started long time ago because when people could not understand what fire was. And then sun, moon, rain, wind, all these things were, today for us those things are natural. But at some point people couldn't understand them. Morning sun comes and they thought that morning sun is like a beautiful girl. They use the word Ushas. Now Ushas means the name for the dawning, early morning sun. Early morning sun is so beautiful, with the flowers blooming and after the rain you can see the water dews and when the morning sunshine falls on water dews they look like pearls. So it's so beautiful. They got so enchanted by it. They sang praises for it. They called Ushas. Ushas is a beautiful goddess. Now, of course, even today we like morning sun, but of course we don't sing songs, right? But although we like it, it's so beautiful. Moon is beautiful. Sun can be beautiful. But then, at the very early stage, people did not know what they were, why they were, what are these things. So because you don't understand, now you see, ignorance is a very important factor here. Ignorance, not knowing. If you know something, then there is nothing to worry about, right? But then when you don't know things, you develop respect. But today, on the other hand, how many of us can say that how sun rises or how moon rises, how a car engine works? Can we say this? No, most of us don't know. When sun rises and how sun goes down, what happens to the sun? Do we know these things? No. But we don't have this respect. Why? Although we do not know, we know that if we want, we can look at the book or go to the Google or whatever. We know that we can know if we want to. But we don't know today. Not many people know it. If you have to explain it, you will not be able to explain. But you don't care about it because it's no longer mystery. We know that it is somewhere explained. It is some textbooks, it is explained. So it is no longer mystery today. But in the ancient time, they didn't have Google. They don't have Wikipedia. They didn't have other things, So they were just wondering. So this is how, this polytheism is a later stage. Actually, initial stage was people were worshipping the objects, natural things, trees, plants, and all these things. So this is basically the idea. You remember in the Dhammapada, Buddha says, Arama Rukka Chetyani Bahumve Saranang Yanti Pabbatani Vananicha. Bahumve Saranang Yanti Pabbatani Vananicha. What is the other part? Arama Rukka Chetyani Manussa Bhayatajjita. Manussa Bhayatajjita. Bahumve Saranang Yanti Pabbatani Vanani. Mountains, forest, trees, things. Why? Manussa Bhayatajjita. They are threatened by fear. Why you fear? Because you don't understand. You don't know what is going on. So you have a sense of fear. Right? So you have a sense of fear. People cannot understand it. Now there is a very interesting story. Now up to very recent time, say about 150 years ago, there were no motor vehicles in the world. In the Europe, of course, it is in Europe, Western world that motor vehicle was first produced. But what people had seen was a cart driven by horses, right? Carts driven by horses in our countries, and also still we have carts driven by bullocks and horses. Now, all of a sudden they saw this motor vehicle going without a horse. Now people simply could not understand how something moves on the road without a horse. Isn't it a marvelous thing? Usually what you see is a bullock cart driven by horse. But here you see a vehicle, we see something moving on the road without a horse. People could not understand it. How did they understand it? How did they understand it was, they thought that horse is inside the engine like a ghost. Because they simply could not understand how a machine can run without a horse. So they have this idea, ghost. Ghost in the machine. Because you cannot visualize, you cannot imagine, you cannot understand how a vehicle goes without a horse. Now even today if you see a bullock cart going without a bull, it will be difficult to understand. So this just about 100 years before, people in Europe did not understand it. So they thought that ghost in the machine. So in this machine, there is a horse is there like a ghost. Ghost is something you can see and touch. Have you seen ghosts? Okay. They can be in the corners of your rooms and here and there. Okay, you might be see it there. Okay. So there is a ghost inside the machine. That's how now you see, even in a very, very recent time, this is how we try to understand natural phenomena, because people did not know how to understand, the vehicle going without being pulled by a bull or horse. So they thought it's a ghost in the machine. So, this polytheism coming to the world simply because out of fear and out of ignorance. These are the two most important factors. When we talk about the origin of religion in this sense, basically these two factors are very important. Main thing is the fear. You don't understand. Things are beyond your control. So fear. And then why fear comes? Fear comes because of ignorance. You don't know. If you know, there is nothing to fear. But if you don't know, then you have to fear. Now this is why Rudolf Otto's definition, he says that there must be something hidden, something mystery, something mystical. So long as God is hidden, God is mystical, God is a mystery, people fear. Now fear is a very important aspect in most of these popular religions. I mean, only in Buddhism you don't find fear. We are not afraid of Buddha. I don't know whether it is good or bad, but we are not scared of the Buddha, right? But we are scared of gods. We are not scared of the Buddha. There's nothing to be scared. We are not scared of the Arahants. They don't come to do any harm to us. Buddha never comes to do any harm to us. But about gods, you are not sure. If they are angry, they will do harm to you. So you have fear. So lack of understanding and fear. Fear is a psychological thing. Lack of understanding is something related to your brain. So psychological, and we can say epistemological. Knowledge related, emotion related and knowledge related. Emotion is the fear. We are scared of things. Why we are scared of things? We are scared of things because we don't understand. So, bahumya saranang yanti pabbataani vananicha aramarukka chetyani manusa bhayatajjita. People are scared, so they go. Now, gradually in the Rig Veda, you can see, finally these objects are becoming divine beings. So sun becomes a divine being, moon becomes a divine being, stars become divine beings, and all sorts of the natural objects. Now Marut, Vayu, Agni, all these became gods. So you have a whole large number of gods. That's what is called polytheism. Poly means many. Theism means the belief in God. So belief in many gods. Now belief in many gods means, although we just use the word God, you have to be aware of how it is right. Now in religious studies, when we write God like this, with capital G God, and also we write God like this, with simple G God. Now in the creationist religion, you have capital G God. Remember, this word doesn't have a plural, okay? The word does not have a plural, because when you say God, you are talking about one God, one and only God. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, you talk about. However, when you say God, you can talk about in plural, gods, many different gods. So polytheism is a stage where people believed in many different gods for different purposes, basically because of that. And then the scholars who studied how gods were gradually created in the Rig Veda, they coined this term called henotheism. Henotheism means some stage between polytheism and monotheism. Okay, they thought that there is a stage during which people believed several gods to be the main God. In other words, still people are not decided who is God, capital G. On the way to that belief, at some point people believed in several different gods to be the main God. For example, in the Vedic literature, you have a god called Varuna. Have you heard? Varuna is at some point considered to be the main god. Now in the Vedic literature, they have this concept. Now they look at the world. Now again, lack of understanding. They see that morning sun comes and the sun goes down, and then moon comes, seasons come. They thought that how is this happening? The people could, after long observation, people could see there are days, there are months, and there's a waxing moon, waning moon, moon gradually growing up, gradually reducing. So all these things, there is some kind of pattern in the universe, some order, some pattern. So they thought that this Varuna is the Oh, this one's. Okay, they thought that Varuna is really the one who is taking care of this pattern. In Vedic language is called Rita. Now Rita means pattern, that means order, Rita. So they thought that Varuna is the main god and he is the one who is taking care of Rita. Rita means the order. That means he is the one who is taking care of sun comes in the morning and goes down in the evening, moon comes after that, that sort of thing. And in the rainy season it rains, in the winter season it snows. So in the early Vedic period they thought that this Rita, this order, somebody has to do that. Now today we know that these seasons and all these things are not somebody doing it. It's simply because the way our earth is situated, the way it goes around the sun, we have all these differentiations. But however, they did not know it during those times. So they thought that this pattern or order you see in the world is a result of somebody controlling it. So they thought that someone is doing it. Someone is making sure that sun rises in the morning. Okay. So they thought that that is done by Varuna. So at some point Varuna was considered to be the main god and others are subordinate. Now in the same manner we have other gods like Prajapati, and also we have gods like Indra and so on. So various different gods. At some point they believe that there were several different gods who were considered to be the main god. But of course not only one god. So this intermediate stage, this intermediate stage between polytheism and monotheism. Okay. So after polytheism, belief in many gods, you have the stage henotheism. Actually it is a kind of stage that scholars think whether it actually existed or not, we don't know. But when we look at the literature, we can see that some of these several gods were being praised, hymns being sung in order to praise them. These different gods, so selected some gods as if they were the main god. So the henotheism is this in between, intermediary stage, where from polytheism some few number of gods are being elevated to higher position. Okay. Then finally we have what is called monotheism. Now monotheism means basically belief in one god. Okay. Monotheism is belief in one god. So you have on the one hand polytheism, and then opposite is monotheism. Now mono means one, so belief in one god. Finally, gradually people started believing that there is only one god, monotheism. So you can see the concept of God gradually starting from worship of natural objects, gradually many gods, several main gods, and then finally one major, one and only God. So in that sense, the theism, the belief in God, how among societies, human beings, how this concept was developed. So in popularly we believe that God created the human beings, but here you can see human beings creating gods, right? Other way around, okay? Yeah, we believe that, the religions say that God created us. God created human beings. But here you see, human beings are creating gods, okay? Human beings are creating gods. So when you look at Rig Veda, it is very clear that in the Rig Vedic people, they during their long existence, they were creating these different types of gods. Now, this concept of monotheism is something very interesting. Now, in the Indian context, Indian religion, I would say you really don't see a perfectly correct monotheism, because monotheism is really the belief in only one God. But in the Indian religion, even today, there is no really monotheism as such, because they have, for example, even today we have in Hinduism what is called Vaishnava, Shaiva. So there are some groups of people who believe in Vishnu to be the main God. So we call them Vaishnava. Now for them, Vishnu is the God, and then the other people will say Shaiva. For them, Shiva is the main God. So today, if you look at the Hindu world, either they are Vaishnavas or they were Shaivas. Shaivas believe that Shiva is the God. Vaishnavas believe that Vishnu is the God. Important thing is, now Shaivas believe that Shiva is the God, but they don't reject Vishnu. They also believe in Vishnu as some lesser God. Okay? Now, in the same manner, Vaishnavas believe that Vishnu is the God, but of course they don't reject Shiva. They also believe in Shiva. Now, so the two main traditions. And then at some point in Hinduism, we talked about what is called Trimurti. In English, Trinity. So we have Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara. Now these three are called Trimurti. Trimurti means Trinity. Trinity means three things together, inseparable. So that is the idea called Trimurti. In other words, gods having three faces, like face, 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 like that. Trimurti. Now here you have three gods, Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara. Hindus believe that Brahma creates the world, Vishnu maintains it, Maheshwara destroys it. So creation, maintenance, destroying, destruction, these three things are attributed to three gods. Now they are taken together, same creation is process. So God creates, God maintains, and God finally dissolves. Okay? So the three different stages are attributed to these three different stages. Three gods are they consider three gods. So Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara, which is called Trimurti. Now if you look at contemporary Hinduism, you don't see this belief very much. But of course, this belief is very much there in the books and in the text. However, usually now all of them are Vaishnavas and Shaivas all over the world. Now there are many other sub-branches. Now in this sense, you can see that this is not monotheism really. Because monotheism believes only in one God, no other gods. But in Hinduism, while you believe that Vishnu is the God, you believe in all other gods also. While you believe Shiva is the God, you believe in all the other gods also. Do you see the difference? So now that is not really a monotheism, okay? People came to believe in, okay, this is the main God. So in that sense, we can see that it is a monotheistic belief. But monotheism by definition is not really like that. Because monotheist can't be believing in one God as the main God and other gods as subordinate gods. No. According to monotheism, there is only one God. Now Hinduism in that sense, you can't say really monotheistic, okay? Do you see my point? because monotheism by definition is only one God. Now you see the examples for that in Judaism, examples for that in Islam. Judaism and Islam are the most perfect monotheistic religions in the world. They believe in only in one God, no any other gods. Of course, they believe in angels. Now, angels are not God. Angels are, the people who are living in the heaven and, stuff like that, but not really. So the monotheism belief in one God. So in that sense, although we have polytheism, henotheism and monotheism, monotheism means belief in one God, but actual Indian religious belief, we don't have really monotheism because we do have belief in so many gods. Now, again, Vaishnavas believe in Vishnu, but they don't reject other gods. Shaivas believe in Shiva, but they don't reject other gods. They also pay homage and, and then if you go to India, of course, you have Durga, very popular, and, everybody across all the cultures, and also Gana, the god Gana, who is, elephantine person. What is this? There is a name for it. Now Ganesha, all those gods are in addition to Shaivite or Vaishnavite beliefs. So in Indian context, you can say that it's a very complex thing. So many gods, okay, so many gods, and so many beliefs. If you go to India, practically every day there is some god-related festival going on. So many gods. So anyhow, how they started in the Indian tradition, you can see this the difference in this evolution in polytheism, henotheism and monotheism. Okay, moving from it, we go to the theistic and monistic. Now actually theistic and monistic means, now in the monotheism, when we say something is monotheism, it has particular characteristics. Okay. If you say belief in one God, now when we say God in this sense, actually what we mean is, we mean a particular God with following characteristics. One is, this God is a creator. This God is omniscient. This God is omnipotent. This God is all good. Benevolent. This God is omnipresent. Now, these are the essential characteristic of when we say God. In a monotheistic tradition, when you talk about monotheism, by definition, belief in one God, monotheistic God means, that God has to have these characteristics. So the number one is, that God is the creator God. It is that God who creates this universe. So the creation is assigned to the God. So the God created the universe. Now that is the major characteristic. And that God is omniscient, knows everything, omnipotent, has all the powers or can do anything, omnipotent, can do anything, knows everything, can do anything. He is nothing but benevolent and good. He is not at all bad, and he is also omnipresent in the sense he is present everywhere. He is found all over the universe, everywhere. Now, these are considered to be the characteristic of monotheistic God. When we talk about monotheism, you are talking about a God with these characteristics. Okay. Now, So in the study of religion, when we talk about monotheism, we are actually using this term to indicate this kind of God. Now if you look at say Judaism, Judaism is a good example for monotheistic God. I told you this story in the Torah, in Old Testament, God and Abraham having a covenant, agreement. There God says to Abraham, you don't believe in any other gods. You believe only in me. Now, this story is a little bit funny because at that point you can see that there were people had many different belief in many different gods. But in the history, at some point, one particular group of people accepted this God as the God. But of course, Jews are not the only people in the world, right? There were many other people, they believed in many other gods, but Jews accepted this concept of monotheism. There is only one God, only but one God. So there is no second God. So this is how Judaism started. And then in Judaic philosophy, gradually you can see that this monotheistic idea that there is only one God in the universe gradually developing. And then if you read Old Testament is a very, very interesting reading. Actually, Old Testament and New Testament. I think, Venerable, we should have a copy of Quran and copy of Old Testament and New Testament in the library, because for the people to read. I don't know whether already you have it, but if not, because reading this literature is very interesting. Now when you read Old Testament, you can see there is the story of Genesis, beginning of the world. Now in that story, whole story of how God created. Now God, it says that created human being in his own image. So we are like God, according to it. But of course not like we like Burmese or Sri Lankan, but they like more European, like with the white, right, fair color and big beard and all that. But anyhow, the belief is that God created human being according to his image, okay? And then God created man, and the God, so that man was alone. Then when he was asleep, God took a rib from him and then created woman. And then also God created many other things like animals, everything God created. It's kind of very interesting. It is like, God doing this work, very hard. So 6 days he did non-stop this creation, and 7th day God took rest. Now that is why still in the Western world, Sunday is a holiday. Sunday is a holiday. Actually, it's only very recently that people do a lot of things on Sunday. Those days, say like 50, 60 years ago, Sunday was a sleeping day. People don't do anything because you are not supposed to do anything. Particularly Jew people, even today, they don't do anything on Sunday. In Western societies also, Friday and Saturday, they do all kinds of things. But then Sunday, they just go to church, other people sleep, and that's all. They don't do anything. Because Sunday, Sabbath day, you are not supposed to do anything. Why? Because God created 6 days, and 7th day God rested. So because of that, human beings are also supposed to rest. But anyhow, the story is that God's creation. Now, this story is pretty ordinary, primitive, simple story. Okay, God like creating, take clay and we make a statue. God was creating. God was doing something. So he created. So creation is attributed to God. Now we will discuss some of these things further in our future discussions. But this basic idea, God is the creator. But then God is all knowing and all good and all powerful. Now why do you put these attributes to the God? Now God has to be all good. Why? If you say God is all powerful, if you say God can do anything, if a person who can do anything is a bad person, then what? You are in trouble, right? If a person who can do anything is a bad person, that person is very dangerous. So God is not a bad person, God is a good person. God can do anything, but God is very good. And God knows everything, omniscient. So there is no problem. Actually, God knows. So the whole idea is that God created this world for some kind of purpose. Now, in the morning I talked about determinism. Theistic determinism means God created this world and then God created it for a purpose. So according to that belief, each one of us, you, me and all of us, created by God for a purpose. Now we don't know it, but God knows it because He is all-knowing. He is all-knowing. And also, He created, He knows where it is going, and He has this purpose in His mind. So, this creationist story is a very interesting story. Because, in other words, here again you can see that the concept of God, with these attributes, you gradually assign these attributes to a God, and then you take refuge in that God. So therefore the monotheistic idea is that God creates the universe, and then this is the characteristic of that God. So the determinism comes from this, because if God created the universe, if He has a plan in His mind, we are just like small pegs in a huge machine. The universe is like a huge machine. So we are very unimportant, but we are doing something to this machine, but we don't know what we are doing. So we are not responsible for ourselves ultimately. However, Christianity says that no, we are given free will by God, but that's a different thing we will discuss some other time. But free will doesn't go with creationism, because if you believe in God creation, of course, then you are believing in theistic determinism. Okay, so the monism is really the belief in this kind of. And then from monism, if you look at Indian religion, now you have Brahma as God. Gradually, they are developed another concept called Brahman. Actually, we have Atman or Brahman. Now, how did this happen? Initially, it is the Brahma. Brahma means Brahma as a person, like God. However, gradually, now Brahma as a person, but then when it comes to the Upanishad period, in the Upanishad, in the Vedic tradition, Veda, Brahmana, Aranyaka, Upanishad, right? You know those four things. Started with Veda, and then the second stage is called Brahmana. That's the second stage. Third stage is Aranyaka, and then the fourth stage is Upanishad. Now in the Upanishad stage, you have, instead of Brahma, you have Brahman. Now Brahma is a masculine gender. Brahma is a god. Grammatically it is masculine gender. But when you say Brahman is neuter gender. Neuter gender. We have Purisalinga, Ithilinga, Napunsakalinga in grammar, right? Okay. Now in that, Brahman is Napunsakalinga or neuter gender. Now as Brahman, we don't talk about a god. We instead talk about the principle, some kind of universal phenomenon, not really a god. Now in other words, you can see that from, look at the second word from the top, theistic and monistic religion. Now theistic means starting from God, and then finally you come into something like Brahman. Now Brahman is not a god. Brahman is not Brahma. Brahman is a principle. Now this is defined as creative principle in the universe. Now if you look at the Brahmana Hindu religion today, there is this Upanishad. Upanishad is called Vedanta. Vedanta means end of the Veda. That means the culmination of the Veda. Most developed stage in the Veda is called Vedanta. There is a religious tradition called by this word, Advaita Vedanta. Advaita Vedanta. Now Advaita Vedanta means Advaita. Dvaita means double or duality. Advaita means non-dual. Vedanta. Vedanta is philosophy based on Upanishad. Actually in the Advaita Vedanta, they believe in the Brahman. Finally, Advaita Vedanta says, Atman, Brahman are the same. Atman is our own Atma. Brahman is universal Atma. Let me write it down here. It's not very clear here. Too many things. So, Atman, Brahman. Atman is considered to be, Atman is what is called individual Atma, or it is called Pudgalatma, and the Brahman is called universal Atma. It's called Jagadatma. In Sanskrit, Pudgalatma, Jagadatma. Jagat Atma, Pudgala Atma. So individual Atma. So on the one hand you have Atman, you have Brahman. According to Advaita Vedanta, ultimately the liberation is to realize that your own Atma is not different from Brahman. In other words, Pudgala Atma is same as the universal Atma. In Pali discourses you have a term called Brahma Sahavyata. Brahma Sahavyata. So they believed that ultimately you go and you become united with Brahma. So that is Brahma Sahavyata. Actually it is this idea. Your individual Atma gradually you develop and then finally it goes and merges with Brahman. And then when your individual Atma goes up and merges with Brahman, both become one. Advaita means no two, no duality. Duality means Atman and Brahman. Individual Atma and Jagadatma, when you separate from each other, it is duality. But ultimately, what you realize is there is no duality. Your Atma has become part of Brahman. So, Atman, Brahman. Now, you know this Atman, Brahman thing, particularly the Brahman is not a God, not a person. Okay? It is some kind of universal state, not a person. So that is why monism. Monism means belief in one reality. Now monotheism means belief in one God. Monism means belief in one reality. Clear? Monism, you have theistic and monistic religions. So theism means belief in one God. Monism is believing in one principle. So the Brahman is a principle. Brahman is not a person. Brahman is not any God. So ultimately the Advaita Vedanta says that in Advaita Vedanta philosophy idea is that your own Atma, when you meditate, when you practice, when you develop, ultimately goes and mingles with Brahman. So I think I will, you will have to read something on Advaita Vedanta and Hinduism, also about something about Upanishads a little bit. In the Upanishads, finally to conclude, there is the following statement. It says that Tat Tvam Asi. Tat Tvam Asi. What does it mean? It means you, I'm sorry, You are that. You are that. Tat, tvam, asi. Tvam means you, tat means that, asi means you are that. You are that means you are Atman. That means Brahman. So Tattvam Asi means you are Brahman or you become Brahman. In other words, finally you become the Brahman. Non-dual, no two. Initially there are two. You are separated from Brahman. But finally with your realization, you become one with Brahman, inseparable. Now this idea is called monism. Do you see that? So the monotheism to monism. Monotheism means belief in one God. Monism is to believe in one principle. Actually, in the history of religion, first came monotheism. Monism came subsequently as a more developed concept. Monism is not a belief in God. So by that time, in that stage, people don't believe in the personal God. Because believing in a personal God has a lot of problems. Maybe we can discuss them later. But then more intelligent people came to the belief that believing in monism, one principle. So Atman Brahman. Atman is your individual soul, Brahman is the universal soul, and your individual soul ultimately goes and mingles and becomes one with universal soul. That is called monistic religion. Okay, so monistic religion is basically Advaita Vedanta, but some people say that Buddhism is also like that, but of course Buddhism is not. But these are different ways of analyzing religions. Number one is theistic and non-theistic religions, that's pretty clear. In today's world, we can say Judaism, Christianity, Islam are theistic religions very clearly. And Hinduism is both theistic and non-theistic. And Buddhism is only non-theistic. But Jainism, although it is not a world religion, Jainism is also non-theistic, not believing in God. So you can look at the world religions from this point of view. Okay, in different manner. You can classify them as theistic, non-theistic, and also theistic and monistic. And also, now number three is more of how the concept of God, evolved from polytheism to henotheism to monotheism. And then axial and non-axial religion is a more historical thing. Non-axial religion is a primitive historical thing. Axial religion is more developed state of religion. Okay, I think we are reached our time. So basically, in my earlier discussion, I tried to give you some definition of religion. Today, I try to describe to you different types of religion. So theistic, monistic, axial, non-axial, and so on. And I think I have recommended certain readings for you, but also you can read about these things in Wikipedia and other things for some information. Okay, I will wind up for today, and then do you have any questions or anything to clarify? Oh, wonderful, yes.
There is a city called Tirupati. Yeah, and then northwestern and most of the northern side, there is a city called Amritsar. Yeah, Amritsar. And what I found is that there are people there in both places. People made some man-made caves. Man-made cave, a big, huge cave, and put many images of gods and goddesses, big or small, and some of which are very ugly and very horrible and terrible.
Okay.
So As we have discussed just now, as well as Buddhism, what Buddhism pointed out is that Bahawis are America, and university, people go to refuge because of fear.
Yeah.
So that's not conformity with what Buddhism said. Why people go to refuge is such terrible and horrible gods and goddess. That's one question. Another question is taking refuge to any religion is concerned. What Chinese president, Chinese communist leader, Mao Zedong,
Yeah.
once he said that religion is nothing but opium, which makes people dizzy. Because that's just like a tranquilizing drug.
Yeah. That's what the Karl Marx was.
What's his idea? How he can identify religion with religion?
Yeah, Revan, thank you very much. The initial two places you referred to are two of the most important religious places in India. This southern India, you have this place called Tirupati, and then northern India, Amritsar. Actually, these two places are one of the two very holiest places. I have not been to Amritsar, but I have been to Tirupati. Now, they believe that actually Tirupati is a Buddhist temple, Buddhist monastery before. The Hindus transformed it to a Hindu temple, but this is very well known. This is on the mountain. Now, answering your question, actually, now Tirupati is so popular. Thousands of people go to this Devalaya and then they offer money. They say that belongs to Venerable, I think, Andhra Pradesh government. They say that the income of that place is more than the state government's income. Because now I remember I went there more than 25 years ago, 30 years ago, and by that time also I found that some offering were like 25,000 rupees, 30,000 rupees. So which is something like, if you calculate by chats, it can be like several million chats for one offering. Now your question is very interesting. Why do people do that? Because initially, as I told you, people did those things because of lack of understanding and fear. But we are living in a scientific world. But why do people do this? I mean, today there are so many. If you go to Tirupati, there are thousands of rooms you can stay because so many people from India go. And not only that, very young people, you go and the first time goers have to share their head. So young girls and boys, completely share their head. And there are barbers shops, like hundreds of barbers in one street, because everybody goes and shaves their head. You have no trouble because you don't have to shave, but if many people go, they have to shave. Now the question is, Venerable asked the question is, why do people have to do that? Now this is something very interesting. Now in a way, although we have so much scientific knowledge today, I think people are behaving like very primitive manner in certain things, But I said to you, we see sun is rising in the morning, it's not a mystery to us. But if I ask you to explain it, you don't know it. I mean, I don't know it either very much. Because, today we don't consider these things to be mystical because we know that somebody has explained it. But nevertheless, our behavior is something like we are still fascinated and we are still taking refuge in the unknown. Now, these two places are very important examples where thousands of people go and actually my answer to your question will be, although we are living in a scientific world, we are still having this kind of ignorance, and as a result we behave in a very primitive manner. Okay, you go to that mountain with a very luxury modern car, but what you do is something people did in a very early period. So I think again about our own destiny, there is something we don't see. Particularly a lot of people who go to these places are business people. And very often businesses depends on many other factors, right? It's not like you are a university teacher, you teach in the university, I know that I get my salary at the end of the month. But the business person is not like that. He thinks that his thing depends on luck. So, they go to God. So, in that sense, you can see that although people are developed, mature, advanced in knowledge, but still the behavior is, for when it comes to certain things, behavior is very elementary behavior. That is why so many people go to these places. Secondly, when we think about the concept of religion, actually not only Mao Zedong, I showed it here, Marx is the one first who said that religion is the opium of the masses. Because opium was, today nobody smoke opium because there are better drugs now. Nobody is talking about opium. But those days it was the opium. Now what happens is you get addicted. When you get addicted, you can't see anything else. So you keep on going to the temple and keep on doing things. What it means is basically Mao Zedong and also Karl Marx meant by that is what happens is when you get addicted to it, you don't see anything. You don't see your problem. Now according to Karl Marx, poor people are poor not because of their fault. Poor people are poor because of the social system is wrong. So Karl Marx thought that that system has to be changed. But when you get the opium, you don't want to change anything, you just want to be, you are inactive, you don't do anything. But as you know, China today is the second largest economy in the world. Now how did they do that? So they had to do a lot of things actually. It doesn't mean that every and each single Chinese is very rich. But as a country, China is becoming the most powerful country in the world. Now they did that under communist system. They had to do a lot of changes. They had to fight against these things. They had to fight against religion because religion was like that, actually. Now if you take Buddhism in the proper sense, Buddhism is not like that. But the practical Buddhism can be something like that. Because practical Buddhism, people take Buddhism to be something for the worldly purposes. So there is no difference how Buddhism, although what the Buddha teaches is different, how people take religion is like any other religion. So people have all these beliefs. So actually why Karl Marx and also Mao Zedong denounce religion is because of that aspect. Religion makes you think only about the other world and not concerned about these worldly things. That was, they thought, that is something very bad. So therefore religion in that sense has to be attacked. But interesting thing is, if you look at Buddhism, in Karl Marx's own writing, he talks about the Buddhist principle of causality. And Karl Marx was impressed by the intellectual aspect of Buddhism. But the ordinary people, how they practice religion is not very different from. Like in the God theistic religion, people think that everything is because of God. But in some Buddhists believe that everything is because of karma. Now if you believe that everything is because of karma, then what happens is you don't do anything. Oh, it's my bad karma, what can I do? But if you forget about your bad karma, if you do things, then you get things. But people don't get that motivation simply because you think that everything is. So in actual practice, I can say that Buddhism is also practiced by people like any other religion. Okay? But that is not the fault of the Buddhist philosophy, but how Buddhism, how people, ordinary people take it. So therefore, this criticism leveled by Karl Marx and Mao Zedong on religion is applicable to some extent, not completely, to some extent even to Buddhism. Okay, any other comments or questions? Come on, everybody should think of, because I know that there are questions, so don't worry about, answer. Otherwise, you can write in a piece of paper even, okay? It's perfectly okay. You can write in a piece of paper and pass in to me if you are shy of, standing and talking or something, but you can write. Okay, Venerables, now the time is already passing, so I will wind up for today, and then when we will, next time, we will continue with this discussion. So thank you very much for today.